dive into the wild, world-changing stories of the early church and ask all the questions you didn't know you had.
Hi, I'm Sharon Hobbs. I'm a teacher, a lover of all things scriptural, and I am so excited to have a conversation about Acts every week.
And I'm Melissa Phipps, here to ask all the dumb questions, the curious questions, and maybe the ones you were too afraid to ask in Sunday school.
Together, we'll explore the book of Acts, not as a dusty piece of history, but as a living, breathing story of God's power, his people, and his purposes.
So expect lively conversation, honest curiosity, and a few, wait, that's really in there moments.
This is, wait, that's in Acts, where discovery meets faith and theology meets real life.
Hi, welcome to Wait, That's in Acts. We are back again with Miss Sharon to go over chapter 10.
Well, hello, Tara. I am very excited. Chapter 10 is pivotal in the story of Acts. It is very significant, and so I'm going to give you a fair amount of background before we actually start digging into the scriptures. But Tara's going to start by reading the first several scriptures, and then I'll give you the background, and we'll start breaking it down.
And then I'll ask all my questions.
All the questions.
I got them. All right, so let's start in Acts 10, verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion that was known as an Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa and bring one Simon, who is called Peter. He is lodging with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among those who attended him, and have related everything to him. He sent them to Joppa.
Okay, so
That's a lot right there.
That is a lot. So we start out, Cornelius is in Caesarea. Now, Caesarea was a governmental capital for Judea, right? So this area had 6 cohorts set and bivouacked, if you want to say that, at Caesarea, okay? Now, centurion is a soldier that is a leader, kind of like a captain of 100 men, okay? And a cohort is 800 men. So he's kind of a mid-level soldier. The important thing about these men were not so much that they were great fighters, they were great leaders. Their job was to oversee men, right? Mm-hmm. Now, part of the requirements for centurions, anybody of rank in the Roman army, was that they had to be Roman citizens, okay? Many of these soldiers came up through the ranks, and at some point in time, they buy their citizenship so that they could raise into this leadership in the Roman government, okay? Now, that's kind of important because, for one, they're Gentiles, right?
Right.
He's of the Italian band, so he comes originally from Italy, was conscripted probably there. And yet, because they become Roman citizens, they are required to observe the pagan rites, Roman religious rites, and particularly be emperor worship. Because by this time, emperor worship had really become the state religion Everything else was secondary to this emperor religion. So Cornelius here is kind of balancing. He obviously believes in the Jewish God, and he is attending the synagogue. Now, in the synagogues, they had an area that was for Gentiles. The synagogues are not quite like the temple. The synagogues are a little closer, little less division. Okay. In the temple, he could only go into the court of the Gentiles. Right. In the court of the Gentiles, he could hear the prayers. Right. They were not allowed to make any sacrifices.
Yes.
Okay. And yet, almsgiving was an essential, very important element of Jewish worship. Okay. The God-fearers, which these Gentiles were usually called if they attended synagogue and if they came to the Jewish temple. And now he's in Caesarea, so he's not regularly attending the temple that's in Jerusalem, right?
That's right.
But he is regularly attending the synagogue. And we see even through the Gospels that these Jewish God-fearers are often supporters of the synagogue. You know, they have funds, and so they're appreciated because they have funds, right? And they do support, and they accept what they can do.
That's right.
Right? So that's kind of the situation with Cornelius. He can't fully become Jewish. He cannot and keep his job, right?
Right.
It would be a huge deal. He's got to still, in some way, participate in this emperor worship and in this worship of pagan gods, right? So now Caesarea is this Greek city built by Herod for the Roman governor's residence, has a large harbor, has all these soldiers. Really think of San Diego. You know, San Diego is a military town, right, on a harbor. And so it's kind of that sort of deal. And it's the governmental seat for the territory. So we see that Cornelius is in this position of trying to balance his true beliefs, right, and do what he can and participate as he can in the Jewish religion and still maintain the respect of his soldiers, because he's got to be a leader, the respect of his authorities over him, because he's got to answer to the higher ups, you know. In the governmental seat, he's not in some backwater. He is there where, you know, he's kind of being watched and being seen. I want to read you this quote from Polybius, who is a Roman historian, and it describes the centurions so that we kind of know the man that Cornelius is. Now, the centurions were not allowed to have wives, right? They could have people on the side, you know, but they couldn't legally be married. And that was partly because this Roman army had to be mobile. You know, he had to not have to answer to anybody but his superiors, right?
Okay.
So Polybius says, centurions are required not to be bold and adventurous so much as good leaders, of steady and prudent mind, not prone to take offensive or start fights wantonly, but able, when overwhelmed and hard-pressed, to stand fast and to die at their post. So we see this centurion as a man very stable, very faithful, right? And we see that played out even in his attitude and belief toward Yahweh, right? He is very faithful. He is diligently doing what he can, and that is giving alms, right?
Yes.
Giving alms for these God-fearers was like sacrifices for the Jewish people, right?
Yes.
The God-fearers couldn't make physical sacrifices, but they could make alms for the poor, particularly the Jewish poor,
Of course.
and thereby, have respect of the synagogue and still feel like they are doing what they can to worship the God of the Jews, right? Yeah. Now, another element that I think is really important to understand before we dig into everything is that table fellowship, because we're going to see that's a very significant element, and it's a very significant element when Peter has to answer in Jerusalem. It's all about you had table fellowship with these Gentiles, right?
Yes.
We can have the Gentiles come into our synagogue. They'll sit in their place. That's fine. But to have table fellowship was a whole new level of acceptance of receiving them.
Absolutely. Like in that culture, having a meal together showed stature, who you honored, who you wanted to sit with. So to mix that up was a big no-no.
That's right. And in fact, interestingly enough, the Pharisees had numerous rules, laws about table fellowship that to them, they were equal to scriptural requirements, right? So of the 341 rulings of the Pharisees that were considered essential, 229 of those rulings dealt with table fellowship. So more than 3/4, I'm not very good at math, but more than 3/4, I think, were table fellowship rules. Wow.
That's a lot.
So to break the laws of table fellowship, I mean, they had it down minutely. And we know that table fellowship in their society was an element, probably the most significant element, to show your status, right?
Yeah.
Where you sat, where you were invited, all of those things, whether you were served first, whether you were served more than somebody else was, all of these elements were to establish your status or to bring shame.
That's
we an honor and shame culture.
That's right.
So honor was established by your position and your service in table fellowship and who you could invite. They had big banquets, all of that stuff, just to establish who you were.
Who you were not.
Or who you were not. And the Gentiles, they were not.
They were not.
We see in this story, as we go along, that the two servants and the soldier that was sent from Cornelius to Simon's house, right? They stood at the gate.
Yeah.
They did not even go knock on a door. They stood at the gate and called out, because that's as close as Gentiles were allowed into somebody's personal home.
Yes.
Right. So all of those elements are really important. And clean and unclean is important in this, because we're going to see in the dream, he says, oh, those are unclean. Well, we saw if Jesus, who is absolutely clean, perfectly clean,
That's right.
if he touches the unclean, he makes them clean.
That's right.
Right? But the whole Jewish law was anything holy or clean that's touching unclean things automatically becomes unclean.
That's right.
Right?
Then there was a whole set of rules on how to get clean again.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it was a whole big process.
Yes.
So we see the comparison between Jesus making the unclean clean by his association and the Jewish law making the clean unclean by association. So it's important to understand those elements because they really come up in this whole story.
Yes.
All right. So what was the purpose of table fellowship? We already talked about
show
one.
honor.
Show honor and
Yes.
divide out society,
Yes.
right? Because they definitely had a hierarchical society. It was to support kinship because if you shared a meal, and if we won't go back to it, but if you look at the Old Testament, there is what is called the covenant of salt, right? And the covenant of salt was literally a covenant of table fellowship. If you sat down at a table and you shared salt, salt was gold to them, right? And so if you sat down at the table and you ate together, salted your food, so you're sharing salt,
Right.
then you became kinship, fellowship together. And this was a way of ratifying treaties, of agreeing that I'm coming to your aid. If you're attacked, you're coming to my aid. If I'm attacked. So this was a political event as well as family, relational. We think, we have family parties, right?
Right.
And we celebrate family birthdays and stuff. Theirs was taken to a whole different level because there was so much that was unspoken but acted out in these events. It enforced boundaries. Who could come, who couldn't come, who was acceptable, who wasn't acceptable, who was honored and who was not honored. And it allowed them to display their authority, their wealth, their status, right?
Yeah.
By providing these parties and by who you could invite and who would answer the invitation.
Yes.
Right? All of those things are important to understand in order to really understand the import of this whole story. Okay, so why is this event of Peter coming to Cornelius so important in the whole history of Acts? What do you think?
Well, I think it's Peter bringing the gospel to the Gentiles. I mean, it's people who don't belong to the Jewish gathering group over here. It's bringing the gospel to everyone. It's not just for the Jews. And they view that as their God, it's for everyone.
That's exactly right. What was the Great Commission? The Great Commission was,
Make disciples of men.
yes, and take it from Jerusalem
Yep.
to Samaria. We've seen that, right?
Yes.
And to Judea, right? And to the uttermost parts of the earth.
That's right.
So Caesarea is in Judea,
Yep.
and it's including, for the first time, those all across, because here is a representative of the Roman Empire. What does the Roman Empire mean? Civilization.
yes.
It means the entire civilized world, right,
Yes.
is covered by the Roman Empire. So here's a representative of the Roman Empire, and the gospel comes to him, which is a pattern, a shadow that the gospel, and we see, I think I've said it already in this study, that the whole story of Acts, the whole history of Acts, is ever pushing forward to Paul showing up in Rome, the center of the Roman government, the center of the Roman civilization, and presenting the gospel to Caesar, who is the head of the Roman civilization, right? So we see that whole push, and this is another piece toward the completion of that push. So there's so much to it before you even read the scriptures. Isn't that amazing?
So good.
Yeah. Okay. So Peter, now we've already seen Philip, right? Philip took the gospel to who? The Ethiopian eunuch.
Sorry.
Yeah, right. So Philip has presented the gospel to an individual Gentile, right?
Yes.
But Philip was a Hellenist. He already had association with Gentiles of a sort,
Right.
far more than Peter. Peter was under a much stricter code, like law, expectation. Not only that, but Peter represents the authority, the highest authority, right? The senior apostle
That's right.
in the church, right?
Yes.
So he has a very significant requirement. You know, it's almost in our society, when you think about it, like pastors, they have to live up to a little bit higher code
Yes.
than the average man, right?
That's right.
Well, Peter was in that same position. He had to live up to a higher expectation, particularly for all of the Jewish believers, right?
Yeah.
And we'll see down the road this whole conflict between those who thought, okay, we'll let them in, but they have to keep all the law, you know, because the law is primary, versus those who said, no, Jesus Christ is primary, and he is not requiring all of them to become Jews, to observe our law, right? So we'll deal with that down the line when we get there. So Peter has always kept all of the dietary laws. Part of it is that's how he was raised.
Yeah.
Right?
It was culture. I mean, if
You know,
you're
and Jesus kept the dietary laws.
Yes, he did.
You know, he represented everything that he had to keep the law in order to be perfect for the sacrifice for the Jews.
That's right.
Right? So Peter's not even thinking about the possibility of abandoning the law. He knows that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. He knows that Jesus Christ is the final solution, right?
right.
But his culture has always kept the law. His activities are always centered around those expectations. So he's never even considered not keeping the law,
Right.
right?
Right.
Until Acts 10. So here in verse 1 through 3, we see the description of Cornelius, right? He is a faithful man. And we know that he's a God-fearer because he's doing all of the things that God-fearers do. They're in the synagogue, right?
Yeah. He's generous.
That's right. And so he's a patron for the synagogue. And he can't be circumcised, so he can't become Jewish or a proselyte.
Right.
He's got to maintain his job. You know, sometimes it's challenging for us in our society
Absolutely.
to maintain righteousness in God and still observe the requirements of our job.
Yeah.
right?
Honor our obligations. Yeah.
Our
do all
job.
of-
Yeah, exactly. Now, the 9th hour, right? That's
That
where
was
he's
my
at.
question.
Okay.
Yes.
So what's your question?
Well, it's just said so differently in the Bible, you know, 9th hour. They don't say
Yeah, it's not military.
like
it's not our
time,
military
like what
time.
we know. Right.
It's not our military time, and it's not our AM and PM time.
Yes.
Their time was set on their social or their work day, right? And so they start at the first hours, they're early 6 o'clock. The 9th hour is actually for us 3 p.m. And that would be at the time that sacrifices were being made in the temple, right?
Yes. Yes.
So the God-fearers did what they could do. Their sacrifice was to be in worship at that 9th hour when the sacrifices were being made in the temple. And that was typical in all of the Hellenist world, right? And so at the 9th hour, he is in worship, he is in prayer, and he is given this vision, right? He clearly saw in a vision an angel of God entering into his house.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's pretty significant because the Jews couldn't enter
Right.
into his house.
Right.
But here is an angel. Now, he recognizes this angel because he's heard descriptions. The shining clothing, you know, we see the same manifestation of glory on Jesus when he is on the Mount of Transfiguration.
That's right.
That's the same description, right? And so he knows that this is a supernatural being that's showing up in his house. And he, gazing intently, I mean, wouldn't you be staring at him? Right? I would be.
A little fearful. Like, what is going on?
Right.
Yeah.
Says, "What is it, Lord?" So he knows this supernatural being is something.
The Lord or from the Lord.
Yeah, from
Yes.
the Lord.
Yes.
And the angel says, "Your prayers and your alms or your generous gifts to the poor have come up as a sacrifice to God." So obviously here, you are doing what God requires as a sacrifice.
That's right.
That's the highest form of worship.
Yes.
And have been remembered. This actually means recorded by him. So God has taken notice,
Wow.
and God is recording your sacrifices. So you have become acceptable to God. So now send men to Joppa, right? Simon Peter was in Joppa. He was staying, interestingly enough, at Simeon's house. Simeon was a tanner.
Yes.
What do tanners do?
Tan leather.
Tan leather. How do you get leather?
Animals.
You strip it off of a dead animal, right? So, and remember that Peter came from the fishing class, right? Shepherds, fishermen, tanners, you know, they were on the lowest part of the society. You know, they were still Jews, but they were quite as clean as scribes and the higher Pharisees and certainly the Sadducees. All of them were elites and they were clean.
Yes.
They never touched anything unclean. They certainly didn't deal with dead animals,
Right.
which made you unclean.
That's right.
Right. So I think it's interesting how God leads us closer and closer, step by step. You know, he's already put him in the tanner's house, and the tanner is doing a job that was required. People want leather, but they don't really want to associate with the man who makes the leather because he's unclean half of the time at least. You know, he has to do ritual things to get clean to go to the synagogue.
That's right.
You know, so he's kind of living on the edge of society, even for the Jews, right? So he's living in the house of this man who's unclean, and the Gentiles are sent to Simon's house. Now, in their society, usually the tradesmen would live together. You know, if you're going to be unclean all the time, you might as well hang with your friends that are also unclean. So the tradesmen were all living in this kind of same territory area. And so it would be easier for these men to find out, oh, this is where the tanners live. So I'll go down here and I can ask around and find this Simon the tanner to find this man that we're supposed to meet and bring to our house. You know, that's going to be significant, even to convince this Jew to come to our house. Even if we tell him, oh, you know, we saw an angel. An angel showed up in our house. Yeah, sure they did.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So God's got to work on both ends. He's working on Cornelius, but he's also working with
Peter.
That's probably
a good
place.
Spot.
We'll be right back.
Yeah.
It'll take you a week to get there, but we're going to be right back.
I love how God confirms everything. If he has a word, there's going to be a confirmation somehow. So you know that this is what you should do. And so I love how we're going to get to see this play out in the next episode.
Okay, me too.
See you next week.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of Wait, That's in Acts? Where
together we uncover just how wild, surprising, and inspiring the book of Acts really is.
If you learned something new, laughed a little, or had one of those, wait, that's in there moments, share this episode with a friend.
And you can find more conversation, notes, and upcoming topics wherever you get your podcasts.
Until next time.
Keep asking questions, keep discussing.